Okay, so continuing our coverage over Dan Jurgens' run on Thor, we really do pick up with the next chapter of this storyline that he is crafting that took place right after Heroes Reborn. Now, as you all know, when it came to Heroes Reborn, not trying to dive too deep into that conversation right there is the whole idea that you had a few characters from the main Marvel universe get stuck in the Heroes Reborn reality after the events of Onslaught. Now, once you had our heroes come back into the main Marvel universe, their main goal was to adjust with the idea of now being back in their home reality. Now, when it came to Thor in the Avengers, they had fought against a character known as the Destroyer. Now, when it came to that storyline right there, you had Thor being able to win, but the problem was that he did cause this huge explosion. And when he did that, he had killed off a character known as Jake Olsen, who was just a paramedic out there in the field trying to help out innocent people who did get severely injured thanks to the Destroyer. Now, when it came to Thor, he had no idea that he had killed the guy. It wasn't until you had Thor go into hell and be confronted by Hela, but also a but a different character known as Marnot. Now, when it came to Marnot, he made a deal with Thor by basically saying like, hey, listen, because you killed somebody, you were sent down to hell. But the thing is, part of your soul is still inside your body. I can bring you back to life, but you now have to live out the life of Jake Olsen, whose life was cut short because of you. And so when it comes to Thor, he's alive again, but he has to continue the idea of living this life as Jake Olsen. Now, the first issue we're going to talk about will be Thor issue number 5. Now, here's the thing, because with this issue, we're not really going to sit down and talk about every single detail in the book because there's not really much in this one issue that is really important. Only like maybe a couple of things here and there. But with all that being said, when it comes to the opening pages of the storyline, we really do pick up the idea of a guy known as Chucky Diamond, this radio host who has now gone out of his way to talk pretty down about Thor. You see, for Chucky Diamond, he truly does hate the idea of Thor. And the reason why, because when it came to Thor in the first 2 issues fighting against the Destroyer, you had Thor cause a lot of property damage. But also for Chucky, Thor is not really a true hero. The idea of a true hero is somebody without powers, which is wild because he does mention Steve Rogers, but like for me personally, Steve does have some powers there, thanks to this super, anyways. But you also have bring up the idea of police officers and paramedics and also firemen. Like those guys right there are true heroes. But for Thor, he's not. And also, what kind of hero causes so much damage to the city to bring down one enemy? But he also kind of brings up the fact that for Thor, he could have ended that battle if what he did at the very end, he did at the very beginning of the battle. The whole idea of just teleporting the bad guy away in a deep space. But getting back over to the idea of Thor pretending to be Jake Olsen, that also means like he has to do everything Jake did before he had died, like going to work as a paramedic at this hospital. Now, when he does arrive, he's then confronted by Jane Foster. As we all know, in the past time, Thor loved Jane Foster. By this point, Jane moved on. She got a new man who actually walks in, but it's also Thor realizing that he truly can't tell Jane the idea that he's now this Jake Olsen person, pretending once again to be somebody else. Now, for Jake, Thor, he does get called away for, an emergency. Now, as soon as he leaves, you then have Jane be confronted by her man, who does inform like, hey, listen, we have another problem. Like there's somebody right now out there stealing drugs from the pharmacy. Now, the second part of this storyline does kind of go back and forth between 2 different settings. The first is that you have Jake, who's Thor, and also his partner Demetrius leave the hospital to go handle a call with a patient. Now, while that's going on, you also have somebody trying to deliver a package over to Chucky Diamond, the radio host who's currently talking bad about Thor at the moment. Now, for Jake and also Demetrius, for their part of the storyline right here, their patient needs a special maneuver to do. But the problem is paramedics are not allowed to do this move out in the field. They're not even trained to do the actual procedure out in the field at all. But for Jake, he remembers doing this procedure as Donald Blake in the past. And so even though you have Jane Foster on the phone telling Jake, like, if you do it, you are going to lose your license, he does it anyways. Now, he also does mention the fact that he was trained by Donald Blake. And for Jane Foster, she remembers the time where Thor was, of course, Donald Blake. And she's kind of like, wait, huh? Like, there's something going on here. Now, getting back over to the radio host, that guy who was trying to deliver that package is, of course, somebody going after Chucky Diamond who wants to see him dead because he hates the idea of this guy getting on the radio constantly and talking bad about Thor. And so this guy does plan on killing him. Now, when it comes to Jake and Demetrius, as they put their patient in the back of their ambulance, you didn't have Jake overhear the call about what's happening with that radio host. And so, of course, he leaves to go handle that situation, but as Thor. Now, when he does arrive there as Thor, here comes the problem, though. As he throws his hammer to knock out the guy with the gun, his hammer does not come back to him. And matter of fact, he began to see some kind of face on the actual hammer. And for Thor, he's kind of wondering, like, what in the world is going on? Now, of course, the hammer does go back to normal, but for Thor, that's kind of confusing. Now, with all that being said, you didn't have Thor leave being able to handle that situation, but also protecting Chucky Diamond. Now, another plot line we do have to talk about is the whole idea of the dark gods. You see, when it came to Thor, when he arrived back to the main Marvel universe, he found out that Asgard was completely wrecked. But on top of that, everyone from Asgard had just disappeared. And so for Thor, he's wondering, where is everyone at? Now, the dark gods, they have been moving in the shadows. And so with Thor being away from Asgard, you have two dark gods, better known as Paragus and also Adva, being able to head over to Asgard, open up a gate, and allow their version of Odin arrive to Asgard, better known as Zelia. Now, with Zelia being there, that means she's now the actual ruler of Asgard. She has taken over the entire area. But on top of that, let's not forget, she has Odin as a prisoner. Now, this right here is just their first step in their crazy master plan. Now, as we dive into Thor issue number 6, we're really kind of picking up with the idea of Thor having this dream where it's him remembering a time where him and Loki has snuck into this room of council, where it's basically Odin right now with his war of council, talking about the idea of another group of gods who are trying to come after Asgard. Now, you do have Thor basically fall in the middle of the meeting. The thing was, you had Odin begin to explain what was going on, but the problem is for Thor, he does not remember how that conversation had ended. But also for Thor, he is woken up out of his dream because now his day must begin. Now for Thor, he wants to go out of his way to figure out like what actually happened or what Odin told him about the idea of this other group of gods. The problem is that for Thor, that has to be put on the back burner because right now you have Marnot appear to remind Thor like, hey bro, listen, you killed off Jake Olsen and you promised me that you would go ahead and live out his life because again, I saved your life from going into hell. And so of course you have Thor continue the idea of living this life as well, you know, Jake Olsen. Now we also have to remember when it came to Jake Olsen, when you had Thor and also the Avengers fighting against the Destroyer, you had Jake going out of his way to save someone's life. And the thing is, even though technically he did die, but like we're going to pretend that he's not dead because Thor right now pretending to be him, is Jake Olsen now receiving an award for being able to save someone's life in the middle of a heated battle between the hero and his villain. Now, here's the thing, because we're also being reminded about the idea that for Jake Olsen, he had a family, Demetrius, his best friend. There's Hannah, his fiance. There's also her daughter. And so for Hannah and Jake at the moment, they're no longer really close like they used to be before Jake had died, because of Thor. He hates the idea of trying to live this life as Jake Olsen, but also trying to build some kind of relationship with a woman that he does not truly care for. Now, when you do have Jake arrive to receive his award, he also realized that Steve Rogers is there to hand him the award. Now, you do have Jake go out of his way to not accepting the award. And the reason why, because he claims that he didn't do anything at all. Now, a lot of people are very shocked about the idea of this guy declining the award. But it's also Thor saying like, listen, Jake Olsen died. It's not right for me as somebody to accept a gift of somebody I'm pretending to be. Now, again, for everyone else, they're kind of wondering like, is Jake okay? But they don't know that Jake is not really Jake, it's Thor. But we also continue the idea that for Jane Foster, she's beginning to piece things together when it comes to Jake, but also what he said earlier, that he learned some things from Donald Blake. And so for Jane Foster, it's her right now trying to figure out like what exactly is going on with Jake. Like, is there a possibility that Thor is connected? Now, with all that being said, she also heard the way he spoke as well in the last chapter. But when it comes to Jane, she went out of her way to make sure that Jake would not get in trouble, because in the last chapter, when he did that move out in the field as a paramedic, he was not allowed to pull that move off, but he did to save that person's life. And so it's Jane saying like, listen, I'm going out of my way to protect you so that you won't get any kind of trouble. Now, the rest of issue number 6 is really more of us now seeing Thor paying a visit over to, Hercules. Now, when it comes to Hercules, he kind of got depowered in some areas when it comes to him being, a demigod. But when it comes to Hercules, as we all know, he is related to Zeus. And so for Thor, he's saying like, listen, dude, I need to talk to Zeus, because I remember a conversation my father had with his war council about the idea of another group of gods out there who wanted to claim Asgard for themselves. I need to know if the possibility your father knows who is this other group of gods. Now, at first, you have Hercules kind of getting upset about the idea of being kind of like a servant, because it's Thor not really trying to maul Hercules. It's Thor right now just using Hercules as a way to get to Zeus. And for Hercules, he does not like that at all. But for Thor, he does beat down on Hercules, say like, listen, dude, I ain't got time to battle against you and your feelings. I need to talk to your father Zeus. The problem is that when they do arrive to Olympus, Olympus has been completely wrecked, very similar to what happened with, Asgard as well. Now, as we dive into issue number 7, we're really getting into the idea of the dark gods trying to take over Asgard, because we switch over to Asgard, right? And we see the dark gods arriving there. Now, once they do arrive and begin the process of turning Asgard to their own home, you also have them bring over Odin to show Odin like what he has officially lost. It's the whole idea that they were able to move in and take over Asgard very easily. But for Odin, he believes his alliance with the Olympus gods should be able to come here, take down the dark gods, free him, and allow him to regain control over Asgard. But you didn't have the dark gods tell him like, oh, Olympus, don't worry about them. We had basically handled them. Now, again, at the end of the last chapter, we saw that Olympus was destroyed, but there's a tad bit more to that story. But now we have to switch over to Thor and Hercules. Now, when we do, it's the two characters at the moment right now just walking around and seeing the destruction of Olympus. But while you do have those two characters walking around, you didn't have Thor begin to get attacked by Hermes and also Ares as well. And the thing is, they're calling Thor and the rest of the Asgardians traitors. It does seem like this destruction that happened to Olympus was because of the Asgardians. Now, we already know that's not true, but for the Olympus gods, they believe they were attacked by Asgardians. And so you do have Thor at first trying his best to figure out what exactly is going on. And you even have Hercules also trying to help his friend from not being killed off by his fellow gods of Olympus. But then you have Pluto and Zeus appear. Now, when Zeus and Pluto both appear, it's the two guys telling Hercules, like, no, it was the Asgardians who were attacking us. Some of them who are very close to you, Thor, were here fighting against us here on Olympus. Now, while you had this story going on, the dark gods basically tell us that when it came to the dark god, better known as Dechel, and I really hope I pronounced that correctly, they had used their ability to make the Olympus gods believed that it was the Asgardians who attacked them, but in reality, it wasn't. But of course, for Zeus, he had failed for it. Now, for Odin, in his mindset, there's no way that Zeus would fall for that kind of trick. But the problem is, Zeus did. Now, when it comes to Zeus, it's him like standing on business. He says, no, you guys attack us, and here you are now, Thor, an Asgardian, the son to my enemy, standing in front of me, telling me that I'm wrong, I made a mistake, but I know what I saw with my own eyes. You gotta go. And so he tells Hercules to attack Thor. Now, for Thor, he definitely knows there's no way that Asgardians had attacked Olympus. And so it's him right now trying to prove that Asgardians are not that kind of people. So he's not going to fight against Hercules. But for Hercules, he's also not going to attack Thor either, because he knows in his heart there's something going on and he knows he can trust Thor. Now, when it came to Hercules, him and Zeus had some bad blood at the moment. So technically Hercules is not really allowed on Olympus as much as he used to be in the past, but especially right now, because Hercules said, even though you and I have some bad blood between us, I expect you to do what I say. And I asked you to go ahead and attack Thor, but Hercules won't do it. And so for Zeus, they both got to go. He sends both guys back down to Earth. Now, the last part of this storyline is really more of us now seeing Thor and Hercules go their separate ways, because for Thor, he's going to go ahead and continue the idea of finding out what exactly happened to the Asgardians. So the Dark God storyline continues. But when it comes to Hercules, he overhears on the radio that the Thunderbolts were just found out to be old members of the Masters of Evil. So for Hercules, he's now going after the Thunderbolts. And that really wraps up issue number 7.